point I want to make clear. It's that all the challengers, particularly the most recent ones, have an uncanny ability to challenge America on America's own terms.
But this particular model, everybody now in China, in the debate, acknowledges cannot be sustained.
But if, in fact, the G20 is allowed to simply drift along and not come to grips with these issues, then I think it will be a wasted opportunity. Thank you all very much. Let me say that this is the second time that I have been here to speak at Couchiching. I spoke here 10 years ago during the period when we were formulating, in fact, the G20. I mentioned at that time that my father had spoken to Couchiching 4 times. So, yeah, you're going to get back to me, Gwen says, but you do it every 10 years. It's going to be 40 years before I'm going to be able to do anything. Well, I do believe the crisis was a watershed moment. And I think that if, in fact, the answer to that crisis is greater cooperation among the major nations of the world, which is what the G20 is all about, then, in fact, it will not be a wasted opportunity. But if, in fact, the G20 is allowed to simply drift along and not come to grips with these issues, then I think it will be a wasted opportunity, and that's why I'm so glad to talk to you today. It's also why dealing with the consequences of bank contagion, which is what today's mess is all about, must be at the center of the Korean summit.
What I call the past 30 years development of China is really the modernization paradigm on steroids. That's a combination of the Western-style capitalism and the state-led kind of a hybrid of state power-led economy that pouring large amount of labor, cheap labor, into the economy, large amount of domestic and foreign capital particularly into the infrastructure and manufacturing, export-led growth, large consumption of energy, very much a lot of damage to the environment, and China made it to a certain extent to where China today. But this particular model, everybody now in China, in the debate, acknowledges cannot be sustained. Okay, I give you one example. China now consumes about 8 million barrels a day of oil. United States close to about 20 million barrels. Okay, and China has 4 times of the population of the United States. You do simple mathematics. If every Chinese, 1.3 billion of them, consume on a per capita basis, like the United States, of energy, then China alone would need about 80 million barrels of oil per day. And that's the entire global supply, daily supply of oil. Simply cannot be done if it's being done in a traditional way. Because China wanted to have refrigerators. They want to drive cars. China sold more cars last year than the United States, 13 million plus cars. US about just over 10 million. China is the largest auto market, largest auto producer, and every major auto producers of the world are producing in China for domestic market, and in the future, I think, for export back to Canada probably, in some ways, challenging our own auto industry, and our auto industry has gone to China. So the issue now here is that traditional paradigm, as it was practiced, if China is going to pursue happiness, consumption of the way that the North Americans and Europeans have done, cannot be sustained. So the challenge and the debate is how to move on, how to move away to a new paradigm of development.
A point I want to make clear. It's that all the challengers, particularly the most recent ones, have an uncanny ability to challenge America on America's own terms. Now, what do I mean by this? Look at the rise of China. They've largely done so through an American-led world order, American institutions, and largely on America's terms. Now, think about it. Provisions for property rights or flexible markets with floating prices. These are things that were anathema to the Chinese 50 years ago that they've wholesale adopted today. How about the affinity the United States has to the government of India, a full-fledged democracy in a country that oftentimes doesn't seem like it has the capability? And this is the concluding point I want to make, because America's power, it has a lot to do with its hard military power, but I would say that the ideas that govern the international system aren't purely derivative of that power. They're not. They're more derivative of the internal appeal, the endogenous appeal of the ideas themselves. And that's the point I want to conclude on, and that's why America, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your view, is here to stay. Thank you very much.
But I would argue that it was really not the invisible hand necessarily that led to this severe financial crisis. Certainly, national and global macroeconomic policies contributed to the large imbalances in the global economic sector and to the failure of risk management, which played a role in the buildup of vulnerabilities that eventually led to the crisis. And the blame there's enough blame to go around. You can start with the vulnerabilities, as Raz Tetzer has said, vulnerabilities could not have grown so large without the assist of both the US government, which did not believe that the housing bubble posed much of a risk, and showed no interest in reining in the financial sector, and also those governments like China who financed the US through the increase in their reserves. So the blame can go around quite a bit on this one.
So I just want to draw attention to one sort of ideological element that got a lot of play in the financial crisis in 2008 that you probably heard about, which is the so-called efficient markets hypothesis. And people made fun of it a lot. But the efficient markets hypothesis was the view that essentially the stock market always prices in full information about a firm. And people kind of made fun of it. It's not as dumb as it sounds. That is, it's not the markets are omniscient, right? Essentially, it's the view that it's hard to make money on the stock market because there are a lot of people smarter than you. And so, you get some insight about, this firm is probably going to do this. Chances are somebody else with better information than you has already thought of it, right? And furthermore, if you take any particular, sort of thing going on in the company, chances are there are people who know about it. And if the stock price is out of line with what the company is really worth because this information is not public, well, that creates a buying opportunity for the first couple people who find out about it, right? So they buy and so on. And that has the effect of changing the stock price, right? So the stock market winds up, as they say, pricing in information. Now, so that theory got made fun of a lot. But I should point out then that theory itself was a very powerful source of sort of neutralizing excuses for both illegal and unethical behavior, in the run-up to the financial crisis. And a good example of it, and I read this literature, I come across people saying exactly this. They say, for example, when executives kind of pilfer money from the company, when they, take all kinds of compensation on the side or the perks that are not recorded and this kind of stuff, right? All those kinds of opportunities for graft that exist with respect to senior management. The argument went like this. It said, well, that actually is not taking away money from shareholders. That's just implicit compensation. Because when shareholders buy shares in the firm, there's all kinds of companies out there. Some of them have very, very strict accounting standards and very strict auditing, and some of them have loose accounting standards and loose auditing, and therefore many opportunities for executive graft, right? And obviously, the shares of the second type of company are going to sell for less, right? Why? Because shareholders knowingly will expect that executives will be taking advantage of the opportunities that are made available to them. And not only that, they get a benefit from it in that they don't have to pay the executives as much, right? If you were to tighten up the accounting standards, then executives would either threaten to leave or they would simply ask for more salary, right? And furthermore, that's not a tax-efficient mode of compensation, right? Because once it's on the books, they have to pay taxes on it. Hey, you're all laughing, but this is like straight out of the literature of people who say this with a straight face, right? So what often look like shady deals of executives taking money that seems like it should have gone to the corporation or seems like it should have gone to shareholders is actually a system of implicit compensation, which does not harm shareholders because shareholders have already gotten their shares at a discount because the market has already priced in full information of the opportunities for graft that are available to the firm's executives. Right? Now, this was a view that was taken very seriously by very serious people. But I think when you look at that from the perspective of techniques of neutralization, you can see how, it might have even been true in some circumstances, right? But just being out there, it's something that so many people want to be true, and therefore creates such obvious opportunities for engaging in graft that's not going to be, that is in fact going to be harmful to shareholders, I think it, could plausibly be said to have become a major source of sort of irresponsible behavior.
But basically, I guess what my contribution is to this is, as we reflect on the future of shaping policy and we reflect on the role as citizens and consumers, that we really need to create more exchanges, kind of like the spirit of Couchiching actually, where you have people across disciplines and across mindsets actually coming together to create that magic, that watershed moment, because otherwise I really think we're doomed.
Utopian thinking can teach us how to overcome the age-old war between human and nature, the conflict that permeates and consumes every aspect of our hollow consumer world of vanities. Utopian thought and massive change as applied creative intelligence might be the only solutions to this present economic crisis and future ones. Finally, once the power of people is unleashed and a better world is realized, we no longer have to call it utopia. It will simply be the way it is, the watershed way of the world. But now, it's up to you.